Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Taylor, and welcome to a very special webinar about our Aboriginal partnerships. I'm joining you today from Sydney in New South Wales, which is on Gadigal land, and I'd like to offer my respect to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians online with us today. As always, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to say good day and let us know where you're calling from. And I invite you to post any questions that you may have during the webinar, and we'll get to these during the Q&A session at the end. Now, Australia, a very ancient land. For over 60,000 years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have lived on this arid continent. In that time, they've experienced an ice age that lowered temperature by 5 degrees. They've lived alongside some glorious megafauna, such as Diprotodon, the giant wombat, and Thylacoleo, the giant marsupial lion, and then adjusted to a 120-metre sea level rise after the ice age that cut off the connections to Tasmania and to New Guinea and the associated islands. So, seen a lot of change in that time. And across a very wide range of landscapes and ecosystems, Aboriginal people have learned how to survive, how to thrive, and how to manage country for the benefit of people and wildlife. Bush heritage recognises that these sophisticated knowledge systems and the country-first worldview, which are integral to keeping landscapes and people healthy. So today's webinar explores how this knowledge is going to be essential to our conservation mission, but also for the well-being of all Australians into the future. So let's introduce our wonderful guests. First up, we've got Bambi Lees, our Original Partnerships Manager in Victoria. Hi, Bambi. Great to see you. And Bambi is floating in a pond of Nardoo, as we joked just before the webinar started, one of the characteristic plants of that region. Second up is Kelly Retief, with another wonderful background in Northern Territory, I think. Hi, Kelly, Aboriginal Partnership Manager Programme for NT in Queensland. And last up is Vikki Parsley, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Partnerships Manager. And Vikki is also part of the Aboriginal Collective who advise our senior leadership team. Hi, Vikki. Well, listen, great to see you all. Thanks so much for joining us today for this very special webinar. Vikki, I'm going to go to you first. Where are you calling from today?
Thank you, Matthew. I'd like to acknowledge and recognise the ancestral lands of the Murrumarang Yuin people. That's where I'm calling in from today.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I mentioned in the preamble that you're a member of the senior leadership team at Bush Heritage, which means you're part of that crack cohort of people who are responsible for implementing our 2030 strategy, which has some pretty ambitious goals, doesn't it? Can you talk to us a bit about how our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partnerships are going to fit into those ambitions and help us achieve our challenging goals in that space?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matthew. So our Aboriginal partnerships programs on a national scale. So Bush Heritage has a 2030 strategy, and we have 3 key areas, which is obviously reserves, land acquisition, natural capital and ag, and of course Aboriginal partnerships. So Aboriginal partnerships are important in that it's about bringing traditional custodians back onto country and also working across the framework that we have at Bush Heritage Australia. So we're quite unique in that we have a right way science approach, we have right way fire programs, and these are all important activities that we work quite closely with traditional custodians that feed into the bigger picture of our conservation land management practices, and of course working towards our vision of having healthy country protected forever and for future generations. So these partnership programs and what we're about to talk about throughout the webinar over the course of the next hour is really important for the work, and we're very lucky to have amazing people like Kelly, Bambi, we have Ross, we also now have Tiani that's joined the team, and Bruce, that are all working quite closely with our traditional custodians right across the country, and this is actually increasing our national footprint. All of us are first and foremost traditional custodians, and we are heavily connected with the geographic areas that we work within or have already established those relationships. So the work and the impacts that we're now delivering or are working and striving towards our 2030 strategy.
Fantastic to see, Vikki. So many faces on that map. I know that's a big change, isn't it, in the last sort of 18 months that we've been able to have partnership managers right around the country, haven't we?
Yes, that's exactly right. And having our increasing our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff workforce has been really important. As I mentioned, for the outreach of navigating some of the complexities of understanding communities, and geographically, we're all pretty heavily connected in our spaces with community groups. So there's naturally an element of trust. The relationships seem to form a little bit more naturally in that respect. And then, of course, we work quite closely with our broader workforce across Bush Heritage, so our reserve managers, our healthy landscape managers and the ecologists to undertake and have that collaboration of wider Indigenous knowledge systems to improve on the outcomes that we can have in protecting country.
Fantastic. And doing it with some lovely smiles, as you can see from some of the pictures that we're showing there in the background. Listen, Vikki, can you tell us a bit more about right way science? One of the purposes of this webinar was to unpick some of the language and help understand what we mean by some of these terms. So right way science has a special meaning, doesn't it? And it plays a vital role in how we go about our conservation management practices.
Most certainly, Matthew. And I think that Bush Heritage is probably one of the leaders in this space presently in the right way science is about the collaboration specifically of that Indigenous deep knowledge of traditional custodians' relationships and their knowledge on country, and working quite closely with some of our scientists to be able to deepen and increase the impacts. So from a right way science perspective as well, we completely understand that traditional custodians have a different view, a cultural lens of country. They have aspirations, they have values that they see when we undertake work with them. And some of these images are actually a fantastic, showcase of some of that work in action with our staff. And, it's a two-way reciprocal form of a relationship, and it's a two-way understanding, so that by listening and sitting with our traditional custodians, we can understand what their values and aspirations are, what outcomes they would like to see for long-term management on their lands, and then of course working quite closely to bring them in on our reserves as well, so that we can increase those wider values of conservation and some of the targets. And when we actually collaborate Western science frameworks with Indigenous knowledge systems, as I mentioned, the outcomes and the impacts long term can be quite beneficial to both parties.
Indeed. And this is something that's is happening all over the world, isn't it? I know you recently returned from a global gathering in Canada, which was focusing on the right way approach to working with traditional custodians all around the world and First Nations people. Can you give us a bit of an insight into what that was like and how our work in Australia is actually helping to inspire other countries?
Sure. So the Global Congress for the International Land Conservation Network is made up of a network of over 8 countries on a global basis. And I was one of the 12 Australian delegates to participate this year, with an invitation to sit on the panel to actually talk about how do we build trust in partnerships and what are the sort of outcomes and the benefits that can be, rolled out as a result of that. So all of the participants that came were from various conservation sectors. Some were from private, landowners, through to other similar non-government organisations that were working in the same kind of space as us. And no different from Bush Heritage, the key themes, of course, that most people are looking at on a global scale and the impacts that affect everybody is looking at natural capital and ag, First Nations relationships and partnerships to bring people in and work quite closely together. And it was also about, that longer term conservation picture. How can we protect the global climate and the global environmental systems based on some of the common themes that everybody is on a global scale being impacted by, with changes to weather systems, having to face government legislations, some of those barriers, challenges that we're all navigating in terms of the bigger picture to work towards conservation standards. So in that particular light, there was a lot of best practices being shared, great opportunities for people to come together and have those more, bigger conversations about how they'd like to see country managed. And Bush Heritage was particularly a leader in that space at this particular forum. The emphasis was on First Nations culturally led conservation, and all of the work and the framework that we have in place at the moment and the work we are developing and delivering through our Aboriginal partnerships programs was something that was definitely at the forefront in that particular in those conversations. So even some of the other First Nations people that I was able to sit with, we had a few conversations around what is taking place on our lands, and First Nations people from Canada, Africa, there was parts of the States as well that people were participating from. All were highly impressed with the work that we're doing. One of the other things that came to the forefront, of course, too, was that having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employees within our organisation was something that was quite important in being able to increase that capacity and the outreach. And that was something that, not necessarily had been explored yet in some of the other countries. They still had non-First Nations people that were trying, quite passionate, quite committed to working with First Nations people, but still finding that they were having a few difficulties navigating that particular space. So it was certainly a privilege to be able to share some of the work that we do and talk about the amazing people that we have in Bush Heritage presently that work in this space.
It's fantastic. And any personal highlight that really affected you? Any takeaway that you found, particularly moving?
It was, for myself, it was the more moving stuff was spending time with some of the powerful female First Nation leaders, and also being able to participate in a moon ceremony with some of the First Nations aunties. So that was actually led by Huron-Wendat elder Auntie Jules, who at the time, took us through a bit of a process, and we were encouraged as First Nations people to provide a blessing at that time on the lands of that country as well. So it was quite inspiring to be amongst those women and hear the impacts and some of the shared similarities that First Nations people have dealt with on a global scale, but also listening to their inspirational talks on how they're navigating and uplifting their people.
Very profound. Sounds wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Bambi, how are you doing, and where are you calling from today?
Hi everyone, thanks Matthew. I'm actually sitting on Wurundjeri country down in Melbourne, but normally you'll find me on Jara country in central Victoria. Yep.
Excellent. Well, listen, Bambi, I'd love you if you could help us understand how that overarching right way approach we talk about, how does that affect the knowledge sharing that's necessary in partnership when Bush Heritage is bringing some Western science and conservation approaches, and it's joining, Aboriginal cultural and deep understanding of the management of the landscape? How does that work?
Yeah, look, a couple of fundamentals first, and principles. So it really is about starting a conversation, building on a relationship, building trust, okay, before you even start talking about or going to traditional custodians with the ask. Okay, it's just about building that relationship, wanting to get to know each other, and not necessarily talking a lot about country. Maybe it's about just life in general. So I'm really big on forming those relationships, just as you would, having a social relationship first and getting to know people and what's important to them. What are the sorts of things that are happening in their life before we then go as Aboriginal Partnerships managers bringing in business and starting to talk business. So I think the relationship really is the basis. It builds a foundation to be able to have hard conversations, but also great conversations whereby you can throw a lot of stuff on the table. And even if people on both sides are a little bit unsure, it does take away some of the barriers, whereby people then don't put that on the table. So we end up being able to have really open conversations, and I think that's really great. So yeah, first thing, build that relationship, then bring in business, talk about caring for country. Also, in terms of right way, it is seeking our shared values first and foremost. So as part of that, getting to know you, building the relationship, do we have shared values? Oh, you're into this. Yes, I'm into that as well. So bringing business into it, we find out what their priorities are and where that fits with our business. So then we can introduce, look, what are our priorities? What do we really care about? And then they may have an opinion on that as well. And so as the time goes on, and I will say right from the start, time is a critical success factor. Right? You can't just blow in and blow out. If you're going to have and build a relationship, you need to take time. Right? You don't build a relationship in a 1-hour meeting or expect to build that trust. So it is long term, but in doing that, you will build an enduring relationship. And what I've found with the mob is that it's intergenerational. It's already been intergenerational for me, whereby I used to speak to the aunties and the uncles or listen to them. Now I'm working with some of their children or the next generation, and now those fellas are bringing their own kids. So, and I'm getting called auntie. So, in my mind, that's enduring. And I've always worked in conservation land management, and those things carry on. People come and go, but if you're connected to country, you'll be identified as being connected to country. And I think that Bush Heritage Australia is an organisation that can say that they're connected to country. So finding those shared values, using that time, building intergenerational relationships, and then start working on business, so, and right way. And First Nations knowledge, that was the first knowledge of this country. So we talk about Western knowledge, but right way knowledge is about recognising the first knowledge of country, which is held within the people. So land and people are one. This is why we can't do it and manage land without the people. Take the people off and, there's, in my mind, an ecosystem service that has been taken out of that system.
Thanks, Bam. You've touched on a number of things which I know from my own journey of arriving in this country in the mid-90s and wanting to understand the very different connection to landscape that I witnessed with traditional owners. And there's a number of learnings along the way that you've touched upon. And that piece about, a Westerner's point of view is that we're humans and land is owned, and there's a relationship of ownership. And I know that's very different when you are living in a land in which you are a part and you are a custodian and you are obliged to look after that country. that's a very profound and very different worldview, isn't it? And
Mhm.
puts different obligations on. So appreciate you touching on that. And that's one I wanted to highlight just for the benefit of our listeners today. And I think the other story I just wanted to add was the piece one of our past CEOs mentioned to me when he sat down for the first time with some traditional owners who'd invited us to sit down and parley about the next subject we're going to talk about, healthy country plans. And he did take the time to do the small talk, to get to know. And in the first meeting, it actually got to the point where the elder he was talking to got slightly irritated and said, "What are you here for?" Because he was expecting a deal. He was expecting, "Have I got a deal for you? We'd like to do this. Can you please do this and we'll pay you money," or whatever. And our CEO at the time said, "No, I've not come with a deal. I've just come to listen. I've come to ask questions and listen and understand." And it transformed the relationship. And that partnership went on to being something very successful. But it takes time, doesn't it? It takes time, it takes trust. And as you mentioned, you need to build relationships through the organization because all of us move on and do different jobs. But if you're in charge of country, that's a lifetime job, isn't it? Not just your lifetime, but the next generation.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
thanks for highlighting that for us. Now, on to Kelly. Hi, Kelly. How are you doing? And where are you calling from today?
Hi, Matt.
Oh, we've lost you. Lost the sound. Just having
Hi,
a little
Matt.
technical put. There we go. We're back.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you, Matt. I'm calling in from Darwin today in the Northern Territory, so I'd like to acknowledge the variety of people and elders, past, present, and future.
Fantastic. Yes, we sounds a little bit tricky there, Kelly. So we'll keep going and we'll see how we go. I mentioned healthy country planning just now. I know that's a critical part of the toolbox of how we work with and engage with partnerships. It'd be great if you could help us understand what a healthy country plan is, and how you go about creating it, and how that involves sitting down and understanding what are the important values.
Sure thing. So, a healthy country plan is a management plan. It's based on the Conservation Open Standards, and the planning process follows a logic or a roadmap to transition a place, to transition a part of country from a current state to some desired future state. So it's a conceptual model, a stepwise process. It's based very much on kind of cause and effect linkages. So if I do this, then, and then the next step will be this. And it's been used in a wide range of different conservation contexts to develop strategic regional plans, for example, pulling in environmental, economic, social aspirations for countries. It's been used to develop Indigenous protected area management plans, bush heritage reserve management plans, for example. What I think has resonated with traditional custodian groups, with our Aboriginal partners around healthy country planning, has been that it follows a participatory process. So it's about bringing people, families back together and back on country, and creating a space for traditional custodian groups to talk about their vision for country and their vision for the future. And so it's a visioning process. It's about thinking about what a better tomorrow would look like. It's about inspiring hope for the future. But along with that, it also creates the space to think about, well, what is the action plan that we can put in place that's going to help us step and work towards that vision for the future. But the process of supporting that coming together, the engagement, the consultation, the talking together with different plan and language groups, that is in no way a logical linear process. It's about, it's about connecting people and countries through kinship. It's about connecting old ways of knowing and doing, the cultural knowledge, cultural practices, to contemporary values of Indigenous land and sea management. And it's also often been a pathway for reviving cultural knowledge and language as well through the process of documenting traditional owners' vision for country and putting it in language, using those words that are meaningful and resonate with people on the ground. So in that way, it can be a really empowering process. The other thing is that healthy country planning can be tenure blind. So if I talk about developing a healthy country plan with Okla people, for example, you're talking about a mix of different land tenure, some Aboriginal freehold title, land which Okla people will own and manage. But part of that is also national park, which Okla manages jointly with Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. And a healthy country plan doesn't see those boundaries when it talks about what this vision looks like for the future. And Bush Heritage first did a healthy country planning process with Bongal Gumbra over in the Kimberleys many, many years ago. But it has been a really key foundational process of building Aboriginal partnerships, particularly Northern partnerships across Australia. So we have many different partnerships from the Kimberleys in the west through to Okla over in Cape York on the east of the country, which have started by Bush Heritage supporting the development of healthy country plans. And to echo exactly what Bam said a few minutes ago, is that it's been a really meaningful space in terms of creating space to develop that two-way understanding, but also to create the opportunities to build the relationship and build the trust first before those partnerships have developed and evolved over time. And through that, Bush Heritage has been able to pivot from developing the Healthy Country Plan as this discrete product to be able to think about, well, what are the capabilities, what is the knowledge, what is the capacity that Bush Heritage can bring to the table to support our Aboriginal partners, breathe life into this Healthy Country Plan, and through that be able to support really key strategic projects or key aspects of our partners' strategies within their Healthy Country Plan to help realise that vision in a genuine collaborative way.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come back in a few minutes and ask a bit more about that. You mentioned the Olkala as one of the groups that you work with. So I'd love to hear more about that in a few minutes. Before we do, though, I'd like to ask Bam, as well as the healthy country plans that we can work in partnership with where there's an Indigenous protected area, we've also got partnerships with traditional custodians in a different sort of format, haven't we? A different style of collaboration. And I know the Warraka Gulcanoe partnership with the Jara people, close to home for you, Bambi, in Djadjarurrung country in central Victoria is quite an important one, isn't it? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, look, for most people listening in, you'd probably be aware that, you know, since invasion, the way that land has been settled, dispossession happened very, very quickly, very early on, and almost completely through Tasmania and Victoria. So the southern states have a very different history for a start than northern Australia. So down here we have a very different environment in which we work in when it comes to the historical impacts for traditional owners. And so a lot of the mobs in Victoria don't own land. They were dispossessed. A lot of it was, held as Crown land, and then the rest was freehold. So it's only been in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years or so, that governments have gone through native title processes, through a joint management process, recognition and settlement process. And so it's only now that, or in recent times, that traditional custodians have been able to get access to land. That is one of the beauties of bush heritage reserves, is that it is freehold. So they're able to access that, whereas often they weren't able to access freehold land. Well, they certainly got locked out of it. So it's been pretty exciting for them to be able to walk on country and walk on land that's hasn't been walked on for a long, long time freely. It's also been exciting for them to know that they can partner with an organisation that is listening to the needs of people and country. So the Warwick Gold Canoe partnership has been a partnership of over 10 years. So I'm really only new in the last couple of years to reap the benefits of a whole lot of time and energy that's been spent on country. But it's a shared strategic plan. So it does follow the healthy country planning system, and it is adaptive, but it's a little bit different in that we've identified our shared values. We still have indicators, we still have goal sets and strategies, so it looks very similar to a healthy country plan, but we're not calling it that. It is a shared strategic landscape plan, and so it is for the whole of country, the whole of Jarrah country, which, as Kelly was mentioned before, it's tenure blind. So we have national parks that are in joint management with Jarrah, which is only a fairly recent thing, freehold, other reserved lands, and bush heritage reserves. And so it covers all the Victorian reserves. It was launched this year, a couple of weeks ago. It was amazing. And now all the hard work begins. And so that strategy is in line with the Jarrah Healthy Country Plan, so their country plan. And basically we took all the plans that had been done by Jarrah and our reserve plans and other information that we had as bush heritage, and brought them all together, basically did a big desktop and said, okay, well, all this work's already been done. Let's not reinvent the circle. Let's not have to go over it again. Let's certainly not ask Jarrah to be consulted again. Let's do our homework. And so that's what we've done. We spent a lot of time bringing all that information together, and putting it in a way where then we could come together and then pretty much do the sticky note process, whereby, these are the things that are important, these are the challenges, these are the sorts of indicators. But something else I'll mention too, it's based on principles as well, and protocols, which were very, very important. The foundational governance was also really important. So it has an Aboriginal governance structure that led us through the process, and so we could keep coming back to that. There's a lot of language in it. We wanted language back in the landscape as well, and so when you read the strategy, it's very much it can be quite difficult to read, but it's funny because even after the last couple of years, I'm recognising words straight away. I don't have to look them up, and it's like learning anything. So I feel like there's been some really great learnings that we are already starting to see even in early days. So look, it's just a different name for something that's very similar to healthy country planning. But again, it was self-determined by JARA. And I think for them, and also from my perspective, having worked in Victoria, it is about, restorative justice. There's something very impactful about doing these plans and seeing the impact on people and not just country. So, yeah, thank you.
That's great to hear. Thanks for that, Bam. I'd also like to hear, Vikki, if you could tell us a bit about the Mwanga Indigenous Protected Area and the relationship there. This is an area about 180k south of Cobar in central New South Wales, and it's on glorious Mallee country with a couple of national parks north and south. We've been working there for over a decade, haven't we, to facilitate a property acquisition for them and the development of their management plan. So, and I know cultural burning is a critical part of that partnership, isn't it? Perhaps you could tell us quickly about that.
Sure, Matthew. Thank you. The Mwanga, particularly in the last couple of years, I've been working quite closely with our national fire team to go in and give the Nyampa people, who are the traditional custodians of that landscape. So Mwanga IPA is actually made up of over 55,000 acres of country. So there's quite a vast area and landscape that they have to manage. And look, the landscape is primarily made up of grasses, but it's also Mallee country. So they have threatened species there, like the Mallee fowl. That's, quite important. And even just looking at the image online at the moment, it's also quite significant in that they have a number of rock art sites that all they've been doing a lot of surveys, they've been doing study, there's been previous archaeological assessments that have been undertaken there that have all supported the significance of that country as being a ceremonial landscape. So Bush Heritage, yes, were implemental in helping secure that IPA in former years. And in the last 2 years, as I mentioned, I've been going out with our team to have a look at, well, they want to return right way fire to that landscape. And in particular, we're looking at those particular rock art sites and how can we best manage those. They have difficulties with feral pests out there, such as, pigs and goats. You can see in that image there, we've actually got caging that's put up across the front of those rock art sites to prevent the goats from going in and actually rubbing up and sheltering in those particular areas. So there's a couple of, other areas of conservation and long-term impacts that they would like to prevent in future. There's a number of artefacts that have been located across the landscape as well, including what we call modified trees. So modified trees are trees that ancestors in the past would have, deliberately removed bark from, and it could have been for the purposes of tool making, making canoes, shelters, coolamans, things like that. So the Right Way Fire program has been really important in terms of their long-term vision and management to prevent wildfires coming in and causing further damage to that landscape as well. So working with the fire team, we've had planning days, which is one of the images up now. So it's being on site with some of the Nyampa people, having those conversations, looking at what particular plant communities are important to them, looking at those sites where the Mallee fowl potentially are. We've even, in that image, you can see calitris, the native pine that's in the background. That has actually become the colonising invasive species, although it is an endemic tree to that landscape. It's actually taken over that country. So we've been even supporting the Nyampa people to do what we refer to as reset burns. reset burns are to reset, as the term suggests, and return country back to its original state. So by supporting the people on the ground, and we've been working collaboratively with other neighbouring groups. Some of the neighbours have come along to witness those events as well. Rural fire services have definitely provided support through their Aboriginal fire mitigation officer teams, and national parks have even come along to provide some support and be a part of those, wider conversations, and as part of two-way learning. And in this next image, you can see that we've even implemented night cultural burns. So we've been practicing a variation of tools or techniques in right way fire returning to country, so that we're preventing intense fire or heat being applied in those particular instances. And by testing these different times throughout the day and under the right conditions at night time, it's actually helped to reduce the fuel load levels on the ground. It has opened country up. Calitris actually doesn't cope with fire, so that's been implementing those reset burns has been a really big tool for controlling those and actually removing those in the landscape to allow mallee to return back in, and of course providing further habitat for the mallee fowl. So it's been really important work. We've just recently finalised our fire management plan with them. We do this at other sites as well. So there's Tarcutta Hills, working with Wiradjuri people. And also the important part with this, through our partnership programs, we're allowing our First Nations people to be a part in the decision-making process on their country, but also to participate physically in that. So it has a lot of benefits, Matthew.
Fantastic. Yes, I think everybody around the world is learning a bit more about how important fire is, but particularly in Australia, it's been part of the landscape, hasn't it, since people first got here 60,000 years ago. Thanks for that. I'd like to move to the north of the country now, and Kelly, back to you. You mentioned the Olcala Aboriginal Corporation, who operate a few hundred kilometres north of Cairns. I didn't pronounce that right, but I'm sure you'll correct me. What's it like working there? And I know they have their totem, Alwal, is the golden-shouldered parrot, a beautiful little bird. And they're doing a lot of work to protect that totem and look after country at the same time, aren't they?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hope my sound is better.
Yeah, good.
Yay. So you're right. Olcala country is located on Cape York Peninsula over in the far northern Queensland. Olcala country straddles the Great Dividing Range, and you have Laura Township to the east and communities of Karinyama and Pomperal to the north and to the west. Olcala has a diverse number of habitats across their country that includes tropical savanna, woodlands, grasslands. It has the headwaters for 5 different river systems that crisscross Cape York, for example. So this incredibly diverse country. And open woodland is, of course, also the natural habitat for the golden-shouldered parrot. Alwal in language, the Olcala people, who take very seriously the cultural responsibility to look after this charismatic totem species that also happens to be nationally endangered. Historically, the golden-shouldered parrot Alwal has been recorded all through the Cape York Peninsula, across the length of Cape York, prior to really the mining industry, but also cattle industry really taking off and starting to boom in Cape York, which has sadly resulted in the loss and fragmentation of a lot of Olcala's natural habitat. But to traditional custodian groups like Olcala, but also the Wakaman people, Kujin, Coca Baron, Taipan traditional custodian, there's a strong cultural connection to Alwal and to Alwal's storyline that runs the length of Cape York up to northern Cape York. And they know this little bird, although in different language, by different language names. The traditional owner groups have since, of course, come together and remain committed as the first Indigenous-led threatened species national recovery team in Australia to support the recovery of the golden-shouldered parrot. And it represents a continued and strong commitment to heal country, but to also provide the cultural knowledge and story connected to our world, and connected to the protection of our world's natural habitat, and to work together to continue to grow population numbers of our world. Our partnership with Okla started very similar to a lot of those other Northern Aboriginal partnerships, through supporting Okla to develop their Healthy Country Plan, or the strategic plan for Okla country, and over time has developed since then to have a really strong right way science focus, supporting the Bringing Our World Home monitoring project. And so Bush Heritage ecologists continue to work alongside our World project manager, Ashley Ross, and the Okla Rangers to support monitoring activities for our world, looking at signs of active nests and trying to get a better read on the distribution of our wild population across Okla country. So that continues to be, a key focus of the partnership. And earlier this year in July, Bush Heritage ecologists James and Christine, together with consultant ecologist Terry Marnie and the Okla Rangers, were able to support the first big our wild population survey on Okla country for a few years, not since 2017, which has been a significant piece of work, recording 49 nests across our wild country. The survey included sort of known strongholds of our wild on Okla, but also included and surveyed new areas, maybe the fall survey where they did find active our wild nests. So some positive signs that reduced grazing pressure, improvement in good fire practices, putting cultural burning back into that landscape is starting to have some positive impact for our well and our well recovery. Of course, there are still other areas that remain of concern as well, and still some signs on country damage to our well nests through ongoing threats, which includes feral animals as well. Pigs, for example, have caused damage to the conical termite mounds where our well builds their nests. And so I guess the key take-home message is that we need to do more. We need to continue to support monitoring efforts. We need to help Okla to survey more of Okla country so that we can be able to build up the data story, and through that be able to feed data into existing habitat suitability models and population models so that we can get a better idea of how the overall health of the population is going. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kelly. And I'm glad you mentioned at the end that the owl wild nests in the termite mounds. Otherwise, I think some people might have been wondering why a lot of blokes were standing around looking at a piece of dead wood or a termite mound. They were actually looking at the nest hole, weren't they? And that's the key part of it. And thanks for explaining that. Okay, well, listen, we've got a couple of questions, but some limited time. So just going to try and squeeze these things in quickly before we finish. Back to you, Bam. In addition to preserving landscapes and some of the priority flora and fauna, such as the golden-shouldered parrot, there's a whole other swathe of benefits, isn't there, that stems and flows from our partnerships, and that's all about the social and cultural benefits. And that's something that we should never underestimate. And it's been a process of Bush Heritage learning that is of equal importance to getting conservation outcomes in our partnerships. Can you just unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, look, we talk about right way science, right way approach, but I think also looking at right way business, the ways of doing business. So the way we do business is just as important about the science side of it. You know, operationalizing those plans is the challenging part, and you can have best intentions on the ground. And during this amazing journey of building a partnership, but if you can't actually do business in the right way, both internally and outward facing, then things can very quickly break down. And it is about reputational risk as well. So sometimes, you really do need to be aware of that and carry that partnership right through the whole of the organisation, because it only takes one incident, one person, one comment to really impact on the relationship. So I think being really wary of that does ensure that we will have social justice benefits. We need to do better at measuring those and being able to qualify them. It's easy counting widgets and the number of plants we planted and everything. So I think there's been quite a bit of work looking at how we monitor the health of country, but also the health of people. So we're starting to very much drift off or needing to over to those sort of social scientist type skills, which we don't all have. But I think, the outcomes that we will see in long before, long after I've left, I'm sure, will be of great benefit. We just need to go about it, probably bring some new skills in as well into this space. I think we're all learning as we go along, and we really want to be able to tell the story in the best way that we can. And let's face it, we all need country. We know how we feel as human beings when we're when we're on country, and how much we love country, and how beneficial nature is, to our existence. So if we can very much measure that and include that into our outcomes, talk about it, tell that story better, I think that would be a really good thing. And it is having to turn what feels nice and fluffy into real outcomes. We're not just doing this because it's a nice thing to do, or we feel like it's our place in history to be doing this. We're doing this for very real and tangible reasons, and because we're a committed organisation, as is our donors. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bambi. Okay, I'm going to throw the last question back to Vikki, if I may. Vikki, very quickly, because we'll need to wrap up. Perhaps you could round this out for us and give us an insight into looking forward, how you see Bush Heritage tracking as we move towards those 2030 goals we talked about earlier, and the alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is 30% of land and ocean protected in order to look after nature properly. Can you give us a bit of a exciting flavour of what might lie ahead?
Oh, look, I think the vision and the direction that Bush Heritage is moving towards is, we're in really good stead at this point in time. Our tracking, our monitoring, the examples that both Kelly and Bambi have given to it today towards, those conversations on partnerships. It's a really exciting time, and we're definitely, one of the organisations that, we work within the parameters where we've got a national footprint as well. So our capacity and our ability to be able to, be a big part or player in conservation for the long term and moving towards 2030 is definitely in positive light at this point in time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm just going to check in and see if we've got any questions. If anybody who's online has any things they'd like to ask Bambi, Vikki, or Kelly, please chuck them in the webinar chat at the bottom, and we'll get to that. One of the things that I've been thinking as we've gone through this is that I'd love to just hear what your individual personal highlights have been from your work during the year, because I think that's something that really brings it alive. And Vikki, you mentioned the highlight from your trip to Canada. Perhaps I can ask Bambi and Kelly if they've got a particular, lovely moment they can relate. Bam, what about you?
There was one incident that came out at the launch, and it was about one of the aunties who had come on and been on quite a number of trips and working on the plan with us. And I wasn't really aware of her situation, her personal situation. And she actually, on the mic, was very, very close to tears and said that this project and coming and doing this work with Bush Heritage, that she was in a very bad place and that it had saved her. And she found it very nurturing and very healing. We're talking about a lady who's probably 60-something. And I just thought, and this is why I come to work every day, because you never know what that impact's going to be, and she was strong enough on the day, I think, so proud that we were finally launching this work, and seeing all the people around, that it gave her strength to be able to grab that microphone and say that in front of quite a large crowd of people. So that was a highlight just in the last month. Yeah.
Really lovely. And I do know that there's been so many stories that I've experienced in the 9 years I've been with the organisation, and some of the most powerful are just like you've articulated. When we buy a new property, we always invite the traditional owners to come and check the cultural sites, walk with us, explain the landscape. We always invite them to come and visit and bring their families. And it's amazing how profound just the invitation to come back and be on their own land, again, for the first time for decades, usually, because they've been excluded, which was mentioned earlier on. Just what a profound piece of healing that can be, and the beginning of a new journey that takes us forward in the right way approach at a decent human level, as well as a cultural and social and conservation level. So thanks for sharing that story.
Ta.
Last word to you, Kelly. Have you got a little highlight you'd like to chuck in?
I think it's difficult for me to pick one, Matt, but I think I'll echo what both Vikki and Bambi have said. The highlight for me is always, being able to work alongside our partners, and it's the relationships on the ground that are the highlight. I think through our partnerships, Bush Heritage has been able to support, important cultural leadership, cultural advisor roles. We're starting to see that really make a difference at the decision-making table. We're starting to see cultural aspirations and a real strong cultural lens drive decisions for our partners around supporting Indigenous land management and management of sea country. So that's a really exciting space to see. And I think, through that monitoring and evaluation, then spending time on country, supporting on-country camps, for example, just seeing the power and the richness of local knowledge and culture, and how being able to bring that forward has been able to empower traditional owners, ranger groups to think about how they're managing country and how they're tracking the health of country going forward. So those are kind of oldies but goodies, and they continue to resonate, I think, with me every time I go out and get the opportunity to spend some time at country with our partners.
Fantastic. Well, I'd certainly encourage everybody to take any opportunity they can to get on country and to do so with the traditional owners and listen to the stories and listen to how the landscape's explained, because it's a very powerful experience, isn't it? So thanks everybody for joining us today. Our Aboriginal partnerships continue to grow and evolve, and clearly there's a good future ahead if we can get more people like the very deadly Vikki, Bam and Kelly to join the group and work with us. We have just appointed a wonderful lady called Tiani Adamson into the new role we've created of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Partnerships Manager. Bit of a mouthful, but I think she'll grow into it. And that role is going to drive our whole future Aboriginal partnership strategy. So hopefully we can come back and hear from her sometime in March and April, once she's been on board for a few months. If there's anything we've talked about today that really captures your interest, then please do feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you more about it. These programs run, as of course you know, on the back of the wonderful support we get from our supporters, whether that's financial, whether that's volunteer time, in whatever form it is. So thank you for being a supporter. Thanks for coming along today. I think we'll probably drop in a couple of contact points in the chat. There we go. They've come in. Megan's reading my mind. So thanks to Megan, our producer, as always, for putting this together. For Linda Ball, who conceived the idea and has put together the program. And thank you for taking time today, everybody, particularly our speakers, Bam, Vikki and Kelly. And look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Bye for now.